at the same time, Ukrainian nationalists, seeing every part of their project gradually disintegrate, are going to become even more hostile, one would assume, towards Russian speakers. And as Ukraine continues to spiral downwards, it's very easy to see how these tensions could start to bubble and blow over and become increasingly severe. So this is nowhere near ended. The Russians maybe have succeeded in containing this problem to the Donbass this time, but be under no illusions, in 4, 5, 6 years' time, it's all going to come back. It's all going to come back with renewed force. And of course, by that point, Russia will be even less integrated into the global economy, the Western part of the global economy. It will have even more freedom of action. It will be militarily stronger than it is today. And the Europeans will, of course, be weaker. So that's where all this is heading. And looking at Ukraine's future, one has to say the prospects are grim.
Next thing is the military aspect of it. And what I mean by that is you have highly trained military personnel who are going to be defeated in battle, and they can't carry out the conventional resistance. So they melt into the woods and they become modern day partisans. And this could be especially true with people like airborne forces or special forces who are trained in that kind of irregular conflict. And there's no doubt in my mind that this will happen, that there will be those amongst the Ukrainians who will refuse to surrender when the time comes, who will insist on carrying the fight. They won't respect the decision made by the top, and they'll continue to fight. And they will fight effectively. They will kill hundreds of Russians, and then they will all die, because that's what happens when you're an isolated insurgency force in the middle of a forest that's going to be surrounded by Russians, and they're going to come in and kill you all. If you try and embed yourself in a urban area, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to sustain meaningful resistance, especially with a police force that is as effective as the Russians are. And now we come up to the third one, which is the citizens' revolt. You know, all these well-armed citizens with their Molotov cocktails and stuff. They are the personification of amateurs. Amateurs never live. They always die because they don't know what they're doing. They're not trained. They don't know how to do covert communication. They don't know how to do deception. They don't know anything. They're just going to go out there and think they can throw a bottle full of jellied gasoline with a rag that's been lit on fire at a tank, and that's wonderful. And they may hit the tank, but then they're going to die. And everybody involved, they'll just get rounded up and they'll get slaughtered. So now I come to the conclusion. There will be no viable insurgency against Russia, period. First of all, because of the way this war is going, if there's going to be a geographical dismemberment of Ukraine, I can guarantee you, and I'll put my reputation on, the Ukrainian population is going to be evicted. They're going to go to whatever Ukraine is, but there won't be a large Ukrainian-speaking population left. The Russians won't allow it. So all that will be left is the pro-Russian crowd, and I don't think Russia will have a problem with this. But I just don't see Russia. I don't see Ukrainians wanting to live in territories controlled by Russia, and I don't see Russia wanting Ukrainians who are hostile to them living there. So I think we're going to see ethnic cleansing along the lines of what we saw with the Serbs in Croatia back in 1994, 1995, when the Croatians said, hey, we got 500,000 Serbs living on our soil who don't like us, and we have to get rid of them. And the U.S. green-lighted a military campaign that literally pushed 500,000 Serbs out of Croatian territory into so we know that Europe is okay with this because they've already done it. So I think that's probably what we're going to see is the physical separation of the Ukrainians who could have served as the kernel, so to speak, of a resistance organization. They're going to be removed from the problem altogether.
Right. Gosh. How does this end, Scott? I mean, have you any idea how this war ends. We have the destruction of the Ukrainian army in Donbass. By the way, I'm sure you're right. I can't see any other outcome there than to see that army destroyed. What happens then? Do we have a negotiation? Do we have a peace settlement? What if Zelensky doesn't negotiate? What if he continues to take the very hard line that the British, for example, are urging him to, and resistance continues? Do the Russians move west? Do they go to Lviv? Do they stay east of the Dniester? How do you see this war ending eventually?
Well, we have to examine, to answer that question, you got to look at it from the four corners of the conflict itself, but then you have to put it into the context in which this conflict was initiated, because you can't ignore that. And then you also have to take into account the consequences of the conflict, because you can't ignore that either. So the first thing is Russia has set forth two military objectives and one political objective. Two political. The first political objective, of course, is the return of sovereign control of Donetsk and Lugansk to the newly independent states of Donetsk and Lugansk. Another one is recognition by Crimea of Ukraine of the Russian control of Crimea. But these are side things. The big political objective is Ukrainian neutrality. That's ultimately why this war was fought. To achieve Ukrainian neutrality. And to do that, you need two things. You need denazification and demilitarization. Demilitarization is simply, it was initially just deconstructing the NATO architecture that exists in the Ukrainian military, that the Ukrainian military could stay intact, but it would just basically the NATO infrastructure would be taken down. The Ukrainian military has decided to fight, so I think now demilitarization means literally there will be no more Ukrainian military. If something's going to exist down the road, it'll be built from the ground up. But do svidaniya, Ukrainian armed forces. Your day is over. And so the war doesn't end until they're destroyed. I think that's just clear. Because you can't leave them. The history says so. All we have to do is take a look at World War I and what happened to the German army that was fighting in France when the surrender came in. They didn't believe they were defeated. They called it the stab in the back, and they withdrew back to Germany. And you created the conditions for World War II. I mean, it just led to the revival of German militarism. If you don't destroy the Ukrainian military, all you're doing is creating the conditions for the revival of Ukrainian militarism. And then you have to marry that with the other thing, denazification. And denazification isn't just about killing every member of the Azov battalion or every other national military formation. It is delegitimizing the ideology of the right sector of the nationalist parties, of making sure that the odious ideology of Stepan Bandera is no longer mainstreamed. So it's about passing laws that ban this. It's about the physical dismemberment of political parties and the arrest and holding to account political leaders who impose this ideology on Ukraine, therefore providing ideological impetus for Azov to commit the crimes they are committing. That's denazification. Why do I believe that's that? Because the Russians know denazification. They've denazified before. They understand what's needed. It's not just about getting rid of the Waffen SS, it's about pulling every single Nazi bureaucrat out into court and then hanging them by the neck until dead if they're found guilty of promoting this kind of conflict. So I don't believe Russia can accomplish that without going west. I don't think this war ends until Lvov has been dismembered. And so this could be a longer conflict than anybody thinks. I could be wrong. Maybe Russia wants to do all this, but maybe they don't have the ability to. Maybe they're after they close the pincers, they won't. But I think when they close the pincers, you're going to see a new reality. Remember, there are no strategic reserves left in Ukraine. They were all sucked up into Kiev, and they're staying in Kiev right now. They've tried to move some brigades down, and they're getting destroyed. They move out of Kiev. They get on the railroads, and they get blown up. They're losing everything. Anything that moves from Kiev to the east is killed. So The Russians, when they close this gap, and when you have 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers paraded through the streets of Mariupol with their hands on their heads, in a repeat of what they did to the Nazis in 1943 through Moscow, the Russian military is now going to be moving into a giant vacuum because there's nothing left. And as they move towards Lvov, the resistance won't be what anybody thinks. It's going to be over that quick. You're going to see people fleeing to Poland, the nationalists especially. And you're going to see, I think Lvov's going to fall before Kiev does. I think Kiev will be surrounded. It's it's down to 2 million, but you don't want to go into Kiev. Kiev is a historical city. You don't want to, and you really don't want to go into Lvov, but you're going to go into Lvov because you have to blow up the statue of Stepan Bandera. You want to denazify, that statue's got to go boom in a dramatic way. The way we blew up the swastikas in Nuremberg, that statue's got to go boom in one of the great defining propaganda moments in modern Russian history. And then you're going to rename the streets, and you're going to get rid of any mention of this guy. You're going to make it illegal even to think his name, and that's denazification. So I see that happening. The ultimate objective, though, is that whatever's left of Ukraine, and I don't know how much geographic dismemberment is going to be taking place. I have said, just totally from the perspective of an observer, I don't understand how Mariupol could ever be Ukrainian again.
Yeah.
So I think that at a minimum, there's going to be additional dismemberment that goes beyond simply the Donbass. I think Mariupol is going to be included, maybe as part of Donetsk, maybe as part of a new Novaya Russia that includes Odessa. I don't know. But I do think there's going to be a significant geographic dismemberment of Ukraine. Where that ends, I don't know. I mean, if I were the Russians, I wouldn't be against, once I get rid of all the Stepan Bandera people and blow up the statue, turning Western Ukraine over to Poland. And saying, because who doesn't like Stepan Bandera? The Poles. So if you want to ensure that this odious ideology doesn't resurrect its ugly head, give it to the Poles. That's additional.